and welcome to the Safety Artisan. I'm Simon Danucci, and I've been a safety engineer and consultant for over 20 years now. So when I decided to start my own business, I was wondering what I was going to call it. And I looked around at various names, some of which were already taken, and I came up with the name The Safety Artisan for the business and the website safetyartisan.com if you want to take a look. And I came up with that name because I liked the word artisan and what it meant and the connotations. So first of all, artisan means a skilled person who does something by hand. And it can also refer to a thing that is, specially handmade, usually with high quality materials. So I like the sound of that. And I think it's appropriate, even in this modern age where I've worked on, huge projects, multi-billion-dollar projects that lasted for years and involved thousands of people. Because even on a big project, we're still relying on individuals being competent to do a job and to know how to do it, and to have that skill and that awareness and that understanding. So that artisanship, that appealed to me. I thought that's good. And another thing was that there's this connotation of somebody working alone at home, maybe a sort of a cottage industry type setup that used to exist before the Industrial Revolution. Or I should say, before the first Industrial Revolution. Now, whichever Industrial Revolution we're currently in at the moment, I don't know. But we've gone back to a world where, thanks to the internet, you can sit at home and do work. And in fact, thanks to, the recent global pandemic, more and more of us have been sat at home doing work, working remotely over the internet. And I, as an individual, can reach hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people over the internet with my teaching and with my knowledge and experience. So, the internet has really enabled a return to those kind of cottage industry ideals where individual people can do something of high quality and find a market for what they're doing, regardless of, big brand, big business, etc., etc. So we can, you and I can communicate one-to-one or one-to-many, and you can communicate with me, and we can learn together and share together what we want to do. Now, if that sounds good to you, if that sounds something that you're interested in, then please check out the videos and other learning products at safetyartisan.com. And you'll also find me, Simon Danucci, on udemy.com. So if you want to see what I do on a third-party platform, and then that's there too. Okay, well, thanks very much. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers. Well, hello everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to this month's webinar. I'm Simon, and today, as I hope you're expecting, we're going to be talking about safety audits and safety auditing. And can I just check, first of all, can somebody give me some feedback? Can you hear me? So can you give us a reply in the chat, or type in and let me know if you can hear me okay, please.
And also, I can see if you booked with Eventbrite, I can see that you're logged on, so it's great to see you. But if you're not, if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube or X, formerly Twitter, please say hello, just so I know that you're there. It's good to see people. This seminar is sold out, so that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Can anybody let me know? Can you hear me? Hello, you can hear me. Terrific, thank you. Or I'm assuming you can hear me. But great, thank you. The sound is good. That's what we want to hear. Thank you very much, both of you. Right, so I'm just going to move the chat out of the way. What I will do then is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Whoops, it's doing that. Don't worry. Let's pull this up. Okay, you should. There we go. Right, just took a few seconds. So what we're going to be talking about today is safety audit, and we're going to be talking about some process, Q&A, personal experience, and also something called layered process audits, which I ran into while researching this webinar, and I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So we're going to do a bit of that. But before we get on to today's webinar, I just wanted to share with you the reason that we're doing all of this stuff. So 6 use cases, if you like, for what I teach on the Safety Artisan. So first of all, the information and skills and confidence that I'm trying to give people, give users, should help you to, pass that interview if you want to get into system safety or safety engineering. And I've had some really wonderful feedback from people saying, doing your course got me an interview. Clearly, I'm trying to upskill people. I'm trying to take people from, beginners through to intermediate safety engineers and help you to upskill, because, maybe you need to learn to do something new in your career. You've been asked to do a new job. Or maybe you want to upskill because you want to be promoted. You want to advance in your career, and having these extra skills will help you, make you more adaptable, make you able to apply for that job that you wanted and get into safety engineering, perhaps from another field. And that was my background, my experience. I converted to safety engineering. I started out as a regular engineer in aerospace, and I always joke that I got into safety by accident. I got into software engineering by accident to avoid going somewhere I didn't want to go, and then I got into safety when I got the opportunity to do my master's degree. So I'm familiar with the process of converting from other kinds of engineering to safety, and that's what I'm thinking about when I'm doing a lot of my courses. Also, you might want to move up from being a doer to management, further promotion, and that's a whole different range of skills that we need in order to manage a program or a project, manage a safety engineering effort, manage other people, and understand what they do. And then finally, you may at some point in your career decide, I'm ready to become a company director or something like that. And there are particular requirements, particular legal requirements on directors that we should be aware of to manage safety. And it doesn't matter whether you've got safety in your job title as a director. Directors have legal obligations to exercise what's called due diligence. Okay, and if you fail to do that, that can be a criminal offence in some countries. So I teach stuff on that as well. Okay, so that's 6 use cases for the safety artisan. But today we're going to talk about these topics in the webinar. So we're going to go through some basics of safety audit process. And although they're basics, they're a necessary foundation. We need to understand them and do them well. I'm going to add in some personal experience from various experiences of auditing and being audited. We're going to have a Q&A session, and you're welcome to ask me anything, not just about auditing, but any question you want to. We can chat. And then I'm going to talk about layered process audit. And we've got about 90 minutes. Whether we use all of that, I'm not sure, because I'm going to crack through the slides at a fair pace. And then, I will be sending out some goodies to you afterwards. Okay, so if you've signed up for the course on Eventbrite, I'll send you a follow-up email with some goodies and useful links. If you're not signed up on Eventbrite, then get in touch with me, send me an email, and I'll reply with the same. But let's move on. So let's talk about part 1. And I'm going to be talking about safety audit process based on the UK Acquisition Safety and Environmental Management System, or ASEMS. And this is a UK Ministry of Defence system, which was developed by experts for them. And I remember it being introduced when I used to work there. And it's a very good system. It's very thorough and complete, and it's copyright free effectively. So you can, I can share it with you, and you can access it and use it and modify it and do whatever you like with it perfectly legally. Okay, the IP is set up so you can do that. Okay, and those are good reasons to use it. So first of all, we need to recognize POSMS, or the Project Oriented Safety Management System. It's project oriented, so the idea is we've got a program or a project where we're buying something, a piece of equipment or a service, we're contracting for something. It's a project that's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, not just business as usual. And in POSMS, they refer to auditing as a system audit. Okay, and auditing procedures are there, as you can see in the green diagram. And system audit is one of those procedures, and it fits in with other management activities like monitoring and measurement, management review, and then corrective action. Okay, so they all sit together as a family of processes that work together, and they support the core procedures for buying something safely and doing all of the safety analysis. That's in the core procedures. And then there are support procedures like training and documentation and managing competence and all the other good stuff. Okay, so it's a great big integrated system. And if you're doing safety on a program, big or small, you will probably find something really useful in POSMS, which is part of ASEMS. And an audit is just one of those tools for monitoring how your program is going and what's going on. So let's keep going. So when we're doing auditing, we've got 3 choices basically, as the procedure says here. You can either use the procedure, the vanilla procedure, as you like. You can just take it out of the box and use it just as it is. And indeed, if you're a beginner, that's probably a good idea. Or if your organization is new to auditing, safety auditing, probably that's your best option. Start with something that is known to work. However, if you don't want to do that, if you've already got another process, the tool set that works and which you know and love, why not? As long as it's just as good as the mandated process, go ahead and use it. Okay. Not all standards take that approach, I should warn you, but generally speaking, the whole point about auditing is that you're achieving what you're supposed to, not necessarily being dictated to how you do that. Okay, as we'll see later. So you can take another standard or process that's already out there, or you can invent your own bespoke process and tool set. Maybe that's the way your company does business or your organization. You've got your own system. Okay, so if it does everything that the mandated system requires, go ahead and do it. Okay. And as it says, this is in contrast with the core procedures for safety analysis, where you may tailor the core procedures and say, well, actually, there's this bit of the analysis over here that I just don't need to do because it's not appropriate for the system I'm buying. But that is never the case for audit. Okay, so the way POSMS looks at it, it's all about process and rigor of your process. You must be doing auditing. You cannot just not do it. You cannot tailor it out or, tailor the scope to effectively get rid of audit. Okay. And lots of audit standards like ISO 9001 will not allow you to tailor scope. For example, you invalidate the purpose of the audit if you do that. So it's a good point to note that you can get rid of some of the core safety analysis, but you must have audit, which I think is an important point to note. So the purpose of our system audit, it's been designed so that the safety management system is audited throughout the life cycle of the project, and then the procedures have been designed to make sure that you get everything done that you need to. But saying that, having procedures and processes is not a substitute for having competent people. Okay, so you need your auditors to be trained in whatever standard they're using or speciality, because I've mentioned ISO 9001 before. If you're doing, let's say, auditing of a software system or an IT system, you should have been trained to what's called ISO 9000 ticket IT. You see what they did there. So, for example, and I did ISO 9000 ticket training, for example. And therefore, they don't go into massive amounts of detail because they're assuming that whoever is doing the auditing is competent. Okay, so you won't get competent just by slavishly following the procedures because they are not detailed enough to do that. It just doesn't work that way. So that's a good point to note. So here are some objectives for doing auditing, and I've not put them all in because there's quite a lot of repetition in the list in the original document. But the purpose of what we're doing, as you can see, we can assess whether our safety management system or whatever it is we're auditing is operating as designed, or it's compliant with its requirements, what it's supposed to do. We can identify opportunities to improve things or improve either the management system itself or the safety performance. And we can also use it to raise awareness, training, and competency. Because, and that's a good point actually, because I remember being audited by a very good auditor early on in my career, and I learned a lot. Now, audit traditionally can have quite a negative, lots of people can see auditing negatively, but if you are audited by a good auditor, you can learn quite a lot. Okay. And you should, through the process of being audited, the questions that you're being answered, you realize, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing and why I should be doing it. So you can get a lot out of it if you approach it with the right attitude. Okay, I guess the obvious thing for audit is we're going to use it to be sure that we're compliant, or whoever we're auditing is compliant with whatever standards or legal requirements there are. We could do it to recognize good practice, although again, this sort of positive view of audit seems to be quite rare. We can use it to inform the management review process. That's very important. If management don't know what's going on, they can't review what's going on. Okay, so they need some basic facts and data and maybe some metrics to work on. We can use it to inform the development of policy, whether that be for audit policy or other things. And also it's an opportunity to spot ways to improve the process being audited. Okay, so we might we might look at the core procedures or the support procedures. We might be auditing in those areas and go, well, actually, we've uncovered a shortcoming or a contradiction in the procedures that we hadn't noticed before. So there's an opportunity to improve what is being audited, the underlying system, which again, people don't always think about because they tend to go, oh, I don't like being audited. But there's lots of good reasons to do this stuff. So if we think about the system audit scope, what these words are, and these are all edited from the POSM's procedure on auditing. So we're really setting the scene, not just in terms of the narrow scope of the audit, but what are we trying to achieve here? So we're saying that every program has to establish an SMS, a safety management system, and that's the bedrock of what we're doing. And then all activities that are managed by the program need to be within scope of the audit. Okay, so we cannot and should not trim things out of scope. That's bad practice, and that will fail you an audit if you do that, particularly an ISO 9001 style audit. Okay, the standard and trained auditors take a very dim view of people trying to hide things from them and say, oh, you don't need to look at that over there, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. They don't like that. You've got everything that's got to be in scope. You've got to have a complete process that enables the full thing that is enabling your program to work. Now, if you've got outside parties doing work for you, or you're cooperating with other parties on other programs and they're out of scope, okay, they're outside the scope of the audit procedures. However, we should be cooperating and coordinating with those other agencies and sharing audit information with them. Okay, so maybe we will get information from them indicating a problem which may be originated in our organization. So we need to do something because maybe we're supplying them with something, or maybe they're sending us something and we're not giving them the feedback that they need, whatever it might be. So we've got to work together outside of scope as well, ideally. And then we might identify the flip side of that is that we might identify some corrective action or non-conformance that we need to fix in our audit regime. And then that means, we need to communicate that to somebody else because maybe the root cause or something that's making it worse is actually originating in another organization. So we should be passing that on to other people. Now, this is something in the real world doesn't always happen very well because people get oversensitive about audit results and non-compliances, and some organizations will lose it totally if you send them a non-compliance report or an NCR. Okay, and that's unfortunate. It all becomes ego driven, and that really undermines auditing, because if you're too afraid to report a negative result, then the audit is a waste of time. Okay, if we're all going to fool each other and pretend that everything is wonderful when it isn't, what's the point? We've got to look at the facts, and we've got to look at facts objectively, disengage the ego and the wounded pride, and fix the problem. Okay, not blame. We fix the problem. If we try and fix blame, the problem will never get fixed. And that's what I think undermines auditing more than anything else, to be honest. So let's look a little bit at the process. We've got some pictures here. So here's the first part of the process, and the way in POSMs it's broken down. We've got our AAP, we've got our auxiliary process 01, part A, which is our audit management and initiation. So we've got to come up with a schedule. We've got to appoint a lead auditor, and lead auditors usually have to be qualified and sufficiently experienced. We've got to define the audit objective, scope, and etc., etc. Think about the feasibility of the audit. Does it make sense to do it at this part of the program, or is it too late to audit what we were going to audit? We need to select the audit team, contact the people being audited in order to set it up. Now, usually, if an organization is being audited, they'll have the audit plan and they'll know that the auditors are coming round on a certain schedule. And maybe you'll have said, well, I'm going to come round and I'm going to look at this in January, this in February, I'm going to do this in March, etc., whatever it is. So usually people will know in advance what the auditor is coming to do in broad terms. So that's all the setup stuff. And you might well say, okay, well, how do I do all of that? It's in the procedures and it's in the forms and the guidance, which I'll send you afterwards if you wish. So the next stage, having set stuff up, is we've actually got to plan the audit. So review the documentation that we've got. Normally you're gonna need the documentation, their safety management plan, because you're going to audit them against that. You've got to prepare your audit plan, assign the work, prepare your pro forma, so your list of questions. Okay, what's the purpose of this audit, and therefore what processes are we looking at, and what questions do we need to ask? Okay, and again, there are templates available with that sort of stuff to help you. So we then need to conduct the audit, and typically we will have opening and closing meetings where the auditors sit down with everybody who's going to be audited, explain what they're doing. At the end, they'll say, these are the initial results that we've got. And then in between, they're going to perform the audit and prepare some draft conclusions. It won't be the final report, but it'll be enough to give the people the organization being audited a picture of what they found and what's going on. And then finally, we've got the audit report. So the audit has been completed. The auditors go off and prepare their report that is approved and distributed. Any corrective and preventative actions are implemented, and there may be some audit follow-up to make sure that they're implemented. So that's very important. If you don't check that things are being done, they may not get done, okay, with the best will in the world. And then, of course, we've got to file those audit records, because usually there may be legal requirements on safety. I think typically in Australia, you've got to keep records for 7 years, but some records you've got to keep for a lot longer. It varies from country to country. So there are often legal or standards require you to keep records for a specific length of time. And then, okay, let's review our audit schedule based on what we've learned and update. So if we've had really good results, maybe we can back off a bit on the audits, or we've seen really bad results, maybe we need to do a bit more auditing or go back to that area sooner than we had planned. And then we see this feedback arrow going back up to the top. And that feedback arrow bypasses these two processes, and you can see it coming back in at the top there. So that's the feedback from the results that we get. And there's a shorter feedback cycle. If we've determined an audit at a particular point in time isn't feasible, then we may need to go back to the schedule and say, okay, we'll have to reschedule this for another time. So there's our basic process, and the AAPs, 0, 1A, B, C, and D, document these, and there are supporting forms and templates. So I will, as I say, if you're booked on Eventbrite, I will send you the goodies. If you're not, send me an email at admin@safetyartisan.com, or send me a message now, and I will email you the goodies. And I just want to let you know that all of these webinars, and I do them every month, so they're building up in what I call a Safety Engineering Academy. So there's loads of webinars in there on all sorts of topics, as you'll see at the very end, all the tools and techniques I've been talking about. And you can get a month's membership for free using the code 1 month free. Surprise, surprise. But there's a lot more courses at my Thinkific site. And if you go there until the end of this month, I'm running a sale, so you can get all the courses half price, including membership of the Academy. You'll get that half price for 3 months, okay, if you use the half price courses code. So that's all available there for you. Go and check it out, please. You might find something useful. If there's something you want that isn't there, let me know. Give me some feedback. And you can also go and look at all the blog articles at safetyartisan.com, and you could subscribe and get regular emails and updates where I let my subscribers know what's coming up next, what I've published, what's the next webinar. You'll get reminders so you don't miss stuff. Okay, so that's enough plugging. Let's move on. Now, I've mentioned some personal experience so far, but I've got a few things that I wanted to bring to your attention on this. And I'm doing so from the basis of, 25 years in the business of being a safety engineer. I've worked in the UK and in Australia now for coming up for 12 years. And I've worked on European and US programs, all kinds of stuff. So aircraft, ships, submarines, command and control systems, lots and lots of software, you name it. I've done a lot of different things. So my personal experience is from a very broad basis, which I think is valuable, because there are people out there who've only ever done one thing. And some people can be a little bit narrow in their view and say, no, this is the only way of doing things, because they've only experienced one industry. Well, if you're trying to sort of change jobs or get promoted or whatever, that's not always very helpful. So I think there is some value in looking across different industries and countries and different practices and seeing how there's different ways of getting it done. So I'm going to talk very briefly about safety audit. What is it really? I mean, we talked about the process, the mechanics of it, but what are we really trying to achieve? So when and why do we use audits? What practices should we be following and what should we not be doing? That's very important because it's very easy to do it wrong. Who can be an auditor? And a brief word about, there are 3 different terms that get commonly confused. So there's independent safety auditor, safety assessor, and safety advisor. And they're all ISAs, and that sometimes gets confused. Okay, what are the differences? Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about that, because that is an area of frequent confusion. So first of all, what is a safety audit? And I've hinted at this before, but auditing is supposed to be a neutral, objective activity. It's based on facts. It's based on process. not on subjective opinion or people feeling threatened. Okay, so we need to conduct auditing in that way. It needs to be, we've got a process, we've got a plan or something we're auditing against. This is all agreed. There are no hidden agendas. We're not trying to catch people out. We need to be open about what we're doing and keep it neutral and objective. Okay, that's very important. Now, classically, there are two parts to audits. First of all, we need to look at the system or process that we're going to audit for compliance. But before we can do that, we need to say, well, is the system in place? Is it adequate? Does it have all the elements that it should have? And usually the way we determine that is that we're auditing against a standard. So we might be auditing against, let's say, ISO 45001, which is a very common safety standard for saying these are the safety processes that an organization should have. Or we might be using ISO 9000 that says, here's a generic, whatever organization, you should have these processes. Or it might be a software development standard, or whatever it is. Usually we would refer to a standard or a set of policies or something and then say, is what we're doing adequate? Does it include all the elements it should do? Okay, so making sure that the scope is complete. Once we've established that, then we may need some changes to add things in or strengthen certain areas. Once that is established, we can then say, okay, now I can audit you to see whether you are complying with your own process, with your own system. Okay, so those are the two parts. And very often we remember to do the compliance stuff, but we don't always do the adequacy stuff. Okay, and that's very important, because if you're missing out something that you need, it doesn't matter how often you do an audit, a compliance audit, you're going to miss that. Okay, you might see some bad results and some NCRs, but you may not necessarily understand why they're happening. Okay. As I said before, another reason for having an audit, it's a learning opportunity. It's an opportunity for the organization to learn about itself, for management to learn about what's actually going on at the workplace, and so on, and different parts of the organization to learn about how other parts are doing it, okay, and how well they're doing. And also, we should be using auditing for a purpose, to drive quality in our in the core of our business, drive profitability, drive worker satisfaction. Because of course, if we've got a bad process where things are often going wrong, that's very frustrating for people who are trying to make it work. So here's an opportunity to try and fix that and make life a bit more pleasant and a bit less onerous for the workers. But whatever purpose we're doing it for, we should do it openly. Okay, we shouldn't be hidden agendas. You'll see what I mean in the next slide. So when and why do we use audits? So we might be doing it very early in a process, or in a project or program. We might be auditing suppliers to see, or potential suppliers to see if we want to do business with them, for all sorts of reasons. It might be financial, it might be a legal audit, it might be safety, whatever it might be. We usually are interested in the all sorts of things about suppliers to make sure we want to do business with them. We might want to identify risks and even identify rewards. Because I'll give you an example. I used to work with someone who'd come from the insurance industry, and the job that they were in, they audited very large construction companies. And these construction companies would be doing projects that cost hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars. And the insurance premiums for such a big organization, and construction can be risky in different ways. So their premiums could be very high. I mean, tens of millions of dollars a year. And what the insurance companies would do would say, okay, if you adopt a safety management system or a quality management system, and you allow us to audit you to make sure that you're complying and following it well, then we'll give you a discount on your premium because you're a lower risk. Okay. And hopefully everyone's a winner. So hopefully, instead of having accidents and making claims and everybody is happy and people are dead and injured, hopefully we prevent that and save some money at the same time. So audit can be all about reward as well as risk, and should be if we're doing it properly, because we should understand what's the upside, why are we doing this. Important point that often gets missed. So auditing might be event driven. We might have a change of scope, a change of activity. Maybe we've got somebody who wants to be rated at a higher level and say, okay, I want to be, I want to be rated as a 3-star supplier rather than a 2-star or whatever system you're using. Or maybe the regulations have changed and we need to make sure that that change is flowing through and working. Okay. Also, of course, we might be auditing after a problem or an anomaly. Something has gone wrong, and we need to check up more frequently to make sure that's getting fixed. Now, often audits are calendar driven. Okay, we need to renew or maintain status to be an approved supplier, or to say, the regulator says, yes, you can continue to operate, or whatever it might be. The insurance company says, yes, we'll continue to insure you for this premium, or whatever it might be. But you'll have an annual renewal or something like that, and you might have quarterly or monthly or even monthly audits in order to support that renewal. Okay. And then finally, and this is a bad reason to audit people, but it does happen if we're being honest. If a supplier misbehaves or does something dodgy, then sometimes we can say, right, well, I'm going to give you some extra audits because I want to give you a good kicking to encourage you to do better. But also, of course, being audited is a pain and it's expensive. And of course, so that's a good way of encouraging. I say good way. It does encourage people to improve, because being audited a lot is a pain. Nobody wants to do it, so it does push people to get better. Using audit as a stick to beat people with really is not a good idea in the long run, because it leads to bad behaviors. Okay, you end up with a very confrontational approach to audit, people lying, hiding information. So often it can make the situation worse than it already is, because having been caught, they're now resorting to dishonesty to get out of it. So if you get into that sort of, downward spiral of auditing, maybe it's time to pull the plug with the supplier altogether and make a fresh start somewhere else. Because punishing people rarely leads to a positive result that you want. Okay. Let's move on. So good and bad practices. So as I've said before, auditing is all about compliance. Here's a standard which we've assessed to be adequate for the purposes that you're using it or wanting it. And here's a standard, you have met it or exceeded it. That's it. Exactly how you did it is not really the issue. Okay. So I've been on audits where the lead auditor has turned up and basically go, oh, I wouldn't have done it that way. That's not how we do it in the UK when auditing a foreign supplier, who've just got a different style or different culture, a different way of doing things. Not necessarily anything wrong. They were compliant, but that's bad auditing. We're not here to turn people into carbon copies of ourselves, or this is the way we do it in the UK or in America or in Australia. Okay. Are they compliant with the objective standard? Okay. So secondly, audit is supposed to be objective. It's not about opinion. It's about preparation, process. doing our preparation, understanding the process we're auditing, discovering things, saying, okay, what can you do about that? Okay, so it's about discovering errors of omission in scope, and also turning up and asking open questions. What, why, how and how much, where, when and who. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? How long does that take? Where do the results go, or where are the records for that? When does this happen and who's responsible? Those kind of questions. And also the auditor's friend, the greatest response of all, is when somebody says, oh, we do it like this, or we're compliant with that, you say, show me. Don't just make a claim. Show me the evidence, show me the records. Okay, and that is the most powerful phrase an auditor can have. Okay, and I often use it in non-audit situations in order to how can I put this politely, to make sure that people aren't fibbing to me or trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Okay, and audit needs to be practical. Yes, certain standards do require lots of documentation, but if you're auditing, let's say after the development process is over, what's the point necessarily of saying that, all of this development documentation that's generated during development for a temporary purpose, maybe there's no point in counting all those documents and looking at them in huge detail. Maybe you need to look at the summary information at the end. Okay, maybe that's all you need to do. So we need to be practical and pragmatic. It's not a document counting exercise for the sake of it. Okay, we're not checking the shelfware. Okay, I'm conscious that I've got shelfware behind me. We're not librarians. We're looking at stuff for a practical purpose. Again, I've said this before, we need to be neutral. We're not there to score points. We're there to assess against an objective standard. And we're looking at what is significant. Okay, so we need to understand what the process is, what they should be doing, and why they should be doing it. So we need to understand the implications of the benefits of following the process and the potential pitfalls of not doing so. Okay, to a degree. Okay, we can go overboard on that if we're not careful. Very experienced auditors can fall into the trap of going back to the start and saying, oh, I wouldn't have done it that way based on their experience. We're not there to do that, but understanding of what we're looking at is important. Okay, so in safety, we need to understand what our safety processes are and why we use them. So who can be an auditor? So basically anyone really, if you've got some audit training, if you've got some knowledge of the subject and the process and the model that's being used, the why are we doing it, which I've just talked about. Practical experience, yes, that's very useful. But as I said, it can get in the way sometimes. And I know that's sort of counterintuitive, but some people rock up and think, oh, I'm so experienced, I don't need to follow the proper audit process. I can just turn up and look at stuff and spot problems. And maybe they can. But actually, I've seen some very experienced people do some very silly things because they didn't follow the process at all and just rocked up and started spouting opinions. That's not an audit. Okay. So we need a methodical approach to causation. So if we're seeing anomalous results or non-compliances or bad results, just counting the anomalies, the mistakes that have been made is not the point. It's understanding what caused them. Okay, so going back to the underlying process, always, I've seen some evidence of things going wrong. Why is it going wrong? What is the mechanism that's causing these failures, or what is the mechanism that's gone wrong? Okay, and that's what we're aiming for. Okay, that's very important. And again, a focus on facts, not opinion. Okay, and my last slide in this section, because we're coming up for 50 minutes, so we're going to have a little Q&A session soon. So ISA. So which can mean independent safety audit, assessment, or advice, okay, or advisor. So 3 different roles, okay? So auditors never advise. You don't tell them how to do their job. However, when you make an audit observation, you may make your observations very specific, and you may refer to concrete, issues or problems that you've seen, and and that these indicate that something has gone wrong with a particular process maybe in a particular way. So you can make very specific observations that make it obvious to the auditee what they should be doing, but you don't tell them what to do. Okay. So sorry, it sounds a bit pedantic, but that's very important. Secondly, we should note that independent safety assessors do auditing. That's part of the role, but they do more than auditing. It's not just, are you compliant? We're adding, or we're trying to add more value, maybe by doing some risk assessment, maybe doing some independent assessment that the organization hasn't done itself. Maybe we're doing some independent V&V, verification and validation. Maybe that's required by the regulator or a standard. Okay, so it's a fresh pair of eyes, to a degree, redoing work that's been done, or maybe adding in things, maybe special things that the organization we're looking at doesn't have the skills to do. Okay, so we may be adding value by doing a specialist skill, okay, a specialist assessment. So that's independent assessors. And then finally, advisors. Now, an advisor can do anything. This is a slightly dangerous terminology here. I'm always worried about safety advisors, because advisors can tell you to do anything. Hopefully, they've got a sound basis for telling you to do something or advising you to do something, and they should explain what that basis is. You should be able to look at the logic of what they're saying and say, okay, I found this indicates that. Here's a way or here are some options that I'm advising you could adopt to fix this thing, okay? But of course, we've got to remember that advisors don't own the result. They might advise you, they might suggest that you do things, but they're not going to make it happen, okay? You've got to get buy-in from your organization to get those things done. So just a few points to note on that. Okay, so let's have a Q&A session now. I'm going to stop sharing. And let's go back. Here we are. All right. So I'm just going to turn on the chat. So do we have any questions about auditing, what we've talked about so far, or indeed any other safety subject? So I'll give you a few moments to think about that. Do you have any questions for me? And indeed, I can see a couple of people. Is there anybody else out there on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter? Give us a shout. Say hello. Ask me a question, or send me your email address for the goodies. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any questions yet. Okay. All right. I will we'll go to part 3, and we'll talk about layered process audit, which I think is especially relevant to safety, as we'll see. So I'll go back to sharing my screen. So if you think of a question, by the way, just put it in the chat, and when we get to the end, I'll get to it. So let's move on. So let's talk about layered process audit. And this is a term that I came across. I wasn't familiar with this term, but as I was researching for this webinar, it's something that came up as quite a popular search term. And I thought, that sounds interesting. But is it just a new phrase for something that's been around for a while? We'll see. So there's a couple of really good references out there that describe what an LPA is. And one of those answers, it's something for, it says manufacturing, but not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily just to be used in manufacturing. It's a system with layers of protection against critical risks. And of course, as soon as you hear that as a safety engineer, you think, right, yeah, layers of protection, defense in depth. We might think of the old bow tie diagram or the Swiss cheese model, where we've got lots of barriers trying to stop that cause becoming a hazard, becoming an accident. Okay, so now in this case, it's not necessarily a safety risk, but it might be anything that's critical to the business. But clearly, this is relevant to safety risks. This is something, in a way, I suspect we already do, but let's think about that. So here we've got in a much wider application of this defense in depth idea. And instead of focusing on the final result, we look at verifying how we got there. Okay, so this might be for a complex process of manufacture or service delivery or whatever it might be, where we can't fully verify the end product, and we need to actually look at the process in order to get assurance that we've got a good product. And of course, software is the obvious one that falls into that category. We almost always cannot fully verify and validate software by just testing it at the end. Okay, we need to build quality into the product right from the very beginning. And I've got a whole course on doing just that in software safety. So that comes from safetyculture.com. And then a slightly different view from Terveen, I presume that's how you say it, terveen.com. So they're saying LPAs are, again, structured audits across multiple organizational layers or levels to ensure process compliance. And that's another very powerful idea, isn't there? You know, we've got different layers in the organization, and they've all got to work together in order to deliver the results, okay? Whether they be, workers, frontline employees at the workface or facing the customer, whether it be their middle managers or whether it be upper management directors, etc. They've all got a part to play, and they should all be joined up. Otherwise, we've got a problem. And if we look at the illustration over, so great illustration by Terveen, and I want to acknowledge that that's where this has come from. So, we've got top executives, directors and managers, supervisors and team leaders, operators and frontline employees, and they're all going to have they might all have different audit checklists with different questions that are appropriate for their layer, but the checklists are all going to have to be consistent. They're going to have to interrelate. How do the top executives set policy that is needed by the managers? How do the managers translate that into directives for team leaders and supervisors? And how does that translate into actual how work is done, or monitoring work as designed versus work as actually done? Okay, big issue there. Okay, so we're getting into the sort of highly reliable organization sort of context here. So this is fantastic. This is really wonderful illustration. The one problem I have with this is the frequency of audits they're suggesting. Now, if you think you're going to be able to audit top executives quarterly 4 times a year, I think you're dreaming. I think you'll be lucky to see them once every 6 months, maybe once a year is more likely. And then when it comes to, managers, supervisors and operators, suggesting that they're going to be audited monthly, weekly or daily, I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. Unless there's some sort of automatic monitoring, that you've got some sort of software tool monitoring what's going on. And you might be on, let's say, an agile software development project where you're capturing progress daily and weekly, in a tool like Jira linked with Confluence or whatever. But auditing and collecting data that often can be quite onerous on the frontline employee. And I speak from personal experience on large agile projects. Feeding that kind of monster with information can take up a lot of time and isn't always worth it. What's the return on investment? So I don't think this is going to happen as often as they are suggesting. I think that's a bit silly, to be honest. It's a bit academic, but it's a good idea. The principle is good. Just don't overdo it, because you'll just annoy everybody. So how to perform an LPA, and again, this is from the Terveen site, and they come up with 12 steps. Okay. Now, a lot of these steps are pretty obvious. Okay. So, but I think some good points. Okay. We need to learn about best practices, because this isn't just an ordinary audit. We're doing something slightly different. We need to identify those processes within scope. We're going to have to, as I said before, build those custom checklists, which are appropriate for the level, but are, that link together to give us, so we can follow a thread all the way up and down. We've got to think about the project schedule, because there's no point in doing audits of a certain kind. If we're right at the beginning of a project, we need to be thinking about auditing the requirements and the setup and all that kind of stuff. If we're right at the end, we need to be auditing test results and, what we're getting. So we need to be doing appropriate audits for the schedule. Okay. Otherwise we're wasting our time and we'll just annoy a lot of people and get in the way. Okay. We won't deliver any benefits. So we need to train our team. Again, ordinary audit training gets us, to a starting position. But if we're going to do something a bit more sophisticated like this, then we need to understand what the team is doing. We need to, sometimes things that get missed, if we find stuff, what do we do about that? What is an appropriate escalation or corrective process at different levels? Okay. So, senior management can be very touchy about being caught out. So maybe you need to employ somebody who's really quite diplomatic or is at a similar level to the people being audited. Okay, so they feel comfortable on probably a similar background as well. Okay, if you come in as a stranger and you've got nothing in common with the people you're auditing, that's going to be a barrier, particularly if you identify problems. Okay, so yeah, having done the audit, what's the corrective action plan and how do we make sure that it actually gets done? Now, that's not unique to a layered audit, but if we are doing multiple audits at different levels, this has all got to function as a whole. So this stuff becomes more important. And of course, again, if we've worked in a safety management system, then we will be familiar with a lot of these things and we will understand we're not just auditing one process in isolation. We're looking at a process as part of a whole, as part of a management system that is really quite rigorous, because we're auditing safety. So let's look at a specific example of this layered process, looking at software. Now, this is very interesting. This is from, as you can see, it's from geeksforgeeks.org. And they suggest that, LPAs are suitable for software, and I agree, because software engineering is it says a fully layered technology. Okay, this isn't actually the technology. I should point out, you get layers in software in, your 7-layer model of the internet and so forth. Okay, we're not talking about layers of software interacting with each other. We're talking about different layers during software development. So, basic quality to ensure that methods are, things are being done in a rigorous and consistent fashion. If we don't have that, forget the rest. So we need basic quality to underpin that, we're doing things repeatably and consistently. What are our processes? Okay, in general, maybe we are using specific methods to do specific things. Maybe we're doing specific kinds of testing. Maybe we're doing static code analysis. Maybe we're doing a certain kind of requirements analysis and certain kinds of design and modeling. Maybe we're doing model-based systems engineering in order to generate the code. Whatever those particular methods are, which are being, supported by the generic processes, and then what tools are we using in order to make those methods and processes scale and work at an industrial scale, typically. Or maybe we need tools because what we're doing is so complex that we can't do it by hand. It's just not feasible. But all of those things have got to work together in order to deliver a result. And software is a terrific example of that because, as I said before, we can't just look at the end result. We need to look at the process to make sure we're getting assurance of the software does what it's supposed to do and it doesn't do what it shouldn't do. Okay, particularly important for safety related software. So we're going to have some quite rigorous approach to all 4 of these layers. So if we look at these different layers, okay, quality, okay, continuous process improvement, integrity of the basic things that we're doing, security, okay, yeah, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, and all the rest of it. We don't want unauthorized changes to our software. And we also want to be looking at making sure that the software is maintainable and usable, and all the other good qualities that we want. So within that focus on quality, we've got our process, we've got our base layer of software engineering that ties it all together. What are we doing and how are we doing it? So how are we actually going to make all of this stuff happen? And as it says, the process, we're talking about, the entire life cycle, all of the things that we've got to do that have got to fit together in order to get successful software development. And again, we're probably going to be following a standard which we have tailored for a particular application or domain that we're in. Within process, we've got to do these 4 things. We've got to communicate. And again, I've worked on a lot of big programs. I'm working on a big program at the moment. Communication doesn't happen by accident. It actually requires managers to work quite hard and to be empathic with the people below them and above them to communicate the information that's needed. Okay, planning. What are we doing? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Modeling. Okay, more and more in software, we're doing model-based development. So we're not just writing code by hand, we're creating models that it makes it easier to people to verify and validate that we're doing the right thing, makes it easier to bring the customer in, say, yes, that's what I want, this is adding value. And then we generate the software from the model, either directly or indirectly. Okay, construction, yes, coding and testing, static analysis, all that good stuff. And then finally, deployment, actually getting the software to the customer in whatever method. It might be online, we might be running a website, running a service, or providing tools, embedded software, whatever it might be. Very often there's an art and a science to doing that well. Okay, requires a lot of effort. If we get on to methods, How do we do that sort of questions? So how are we going to put all of these things together? Well, at a process level, yeah, there's a big picture level, but maybe we're using specific methods to achieve a specific thing. For example, Jira is a very, very widely used tool in agile software development and other areas. It's used for all sorts of things. But how your project uses Jira, how you need to use it to achieve a specific effect, that is unique to your project or maybe your organization. So just because you've got a tool that will support all sorts of processes, you probably need something more concrete and more specific than that to achieve a specified result. So this is where you think about your methods. And then finally, what are my tools? And I say tools, and it might be software tools, or it might be something much simpler than that. You might have, you might have your post-its on your wall when you work out, what's the next piece of work to be done, which piece of work is in work. Let's estimate that. Let's take it from the to do to doing to done. Okay, for example. There's another agile example. So our tools might be very, very sophisticated software tools, or it might just be post-it notes and a marker pen. Okay, whatever works. Okay, and speaking from experience as an auditor, I've seen people look down their noses at simple methods, but if a simple method works, I've seen somebody doing a very sophisticated system and software development program, and they actually checked the traceability in the model by printing it out, and then the developer and the reviewer used colored pencils to check the traceability, and then they kept that as a record. Now, when my lead auditor turned up and saw that, he sort of looked down his nose at that and said, "Oh, you should be using a software tool to do that." But then the engineers explained, well, actually, the software tool doesn't support what we need to do to meet the standard, which is very rigorous. So we do it this way, and then we sign off the paper to create the records to say, yes, I've done that and everything's correct. So that certainly back then when I was doing this, the software tools weren't always that clever. Okay, so sometimes rather than have some awful mangled solution, because that's all the tool will do, maybe you need something simpler. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Okay, so that's my section on layered process audits. And in a moment, I'm going to stop sharing. And if you've got any questions, do please send me note them down and we'll look at those. So as I've said, this is part of a series of webinars, and they're all recorded and they're all in the Safety Engineering Academy. We did FMEA, so that one sold out as well. We did risk matrices, risk registers and hazard logs and causal analysis last month. Today was safety audits. Next month is HAZOP, hazard and operability studies, event trees, getting on to claims, argument and evidence, and goal structuring notation in June. Looking forward to that one. And then fault trees in July. Okay. And incidentally, I'm now looking to think about what I do after July, my next series of audits. And I'm pushing out a poll on that on LinkedIn and to my subscribers. So if you want a subject and you want to let me know what you would like me to do next, what you would find helpful, then please take part in the poll, the survey, or send me an email and tell me what you want. Okay, that's very, very important. But that's what's coming next. It's HAZOP next month, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So just remains, that's the end of my slides. So thank you very much for watching. So let's go back to and see if we have any questions. We do. Thank you very much. So first of all, let's just look. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here. Shall the audit be performed independent of a running project or always in scope of a project? Right, okay, interesting question. So I think what you're getting at, so there's two answers here. Yes, you can say the project or program is the total scope of what we're auditing, okay, which is the sort of the POSM's approach to say, okay, every project team has to set up its own audit scheme. But you may also have external auditors who are maybe looking at a portfolio of projects, or they might be regulators who are coming around and checking different projects and different organizations, or whatever. You might bring in a third-party auditor to say, okay, maybe we're missing a trick here. Maybe we should bring in a third party to audit or assess our system. And then you would have by inference, you would have a bigger scope, because they might be comparing or they might be benchmarking. Maybe that's not strictly auditing. We're getting more into assessment and benchmarking. But certainly, yeah, you can have both, I would say, in answer to that first question. Thank you. And second question, how do you assess the appropriateness of a safety management system for covering the product in scope? Right, great question. Thank you. So there's two answers to that. So the generic answer is, if you've got a safety management system, usually you will be following a standard, be it ISO 45001. If you're doing risk assessment, you might be using ISO 30,000. No, 30,001. There are lots of different standards out there you could be following. Okay, so that's one way of scoping your SMS and saying, generally speaking, everybody should have these generic processes. Then specifically for safety, early on, you should have done, and I do a lesson on this actually, foundations of system safety. Early on, you need to do three things, okay? So you need to do some preliminary hazard identification, where you think about what your product or service is providing, what could go wrong, what are the potential hazards. You would do some preliminary hazard analysis to say, okay, how might I control those hazards? How might I prevent them happening? How might I mitigate them? What am I going to do? And thirdly, you would look at your safety, your system requirements. Okay, you would do a hazard analysis of those and go, okay, this is what my system is required to do. Functionally, what could go wrong? My requirements are driving me to have a system like a plane or a ship or a car, let's say, or a medical device. Now, there are usually laws and regulations and standards governing those kind of things, okay? Or if your system produces noise, dangerous levels of noise, you are almost certainly going to have legal requirements that you need to meet, for example. So doing your hazard identification will help you to identify, these are the requirements that I've got, of regulations I've got to meet. So doing those three tasks, PHIA and SRHA, to use MIL standard 882 speak, but it doesn't matter what standard you're using. Doing those initial foundational tasks will allow you to scope your SMS, okay? And I do a course on that at Thinkific called Foundations of System Safety, where I talk about those three tasks, and there's a webinar on there about how you put them all together to do what I've just described. So there's a couple of answers there. There's two aspects there. There's sort of generic, we follow a standard, and then the specific, we tailor what we're doing based on the results that we discover, the analysis that we've done. So thank you for those. That's two great questions. Any more questions for anyone or from anyone? Okay, well, If you think of any more questions or any follow-up things afterwards that you want to know about, then do get in touch, send me an email, go on the website and leave a comment on a specific blog article, or join the academy, and you can email me through that. Okay. So I just want to say thanks very much, everyone, for taking part and for the great questions. And I hope you have, whatever time it is where you are, I hope you're having a good day, morning, afternoon, evening. And I will say goodbye. And thank you very much for taking part. Thanks, everyone.